3 astronauts climbed into a spacecraft. The heat shield worked exactly as designed. And when they landed, engineers found something that should have killed them. That mission was Artemis III. No crew. A test flight. And the damage to Orion's heat shield was not a minor anomaly flagged in a footnote. It was unexpected char-lost ablative material burning away in patterns no thermal model had predicted. Engineers stared at the data and used a word that does not belong in aerospace: surprised. Now Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Jeremy Hansen are scheduled to climb into that same design. Not to orbit Earth. To fly 8,900 kilometers past it, loop around the moon, and come screaming back through Earth's atmosphere at 11 kilometers per second. The fastest any humans will have traveled since the last Apollo crew did it in 1972. And the shield between them and 2,760 degrees Celsius of superheated plasma is the one that already showed us it does not behave the way we thought it did. This is not a story about whether NASA cut corners. It is a story about the physics of lunar return, why it is categorically different from anything we have sent humans through in 50 years, why the failure mode that appeared on Artemis I was not supposed to be possible, and why 4 people are about to trust their lives to an engineering answer that is still, in some critical ways, incomplete. To understand what is at stake, you need to forget everything you think you know about heat shields from watching shuttle launches. The space shuttle came home from low Earth orbit traveling at roughly 7-8 kilometers per second. Orion coming back from lunar distance travels at 11 kilometers per second. That difference sounds incremental. It is not. The energy of spacecraft carries scales with the square of velocity, which means Orion returning from the moon carries approximately twice the kinetic energy of a returning shuttle energy that the atmosphere must absorb entirely, and that the heat shield must manage in a single, irreversible pass. There is no second attempt at re-entry. No adjustment. No abort option. The moment Orion hits the upper atmosphere, the physics take over completely, and the crew becomes passengers in a controlled or uncontrolled burn. The heat shield NASA built for this is called the AVC kite ablative system. The concept is elegant in its brutality. Instead of reflecting heat, the shield absorbs it, chars, and deliberately burns away in a controlled manner, taking the thermal energy with it as gas. Think of it as a sacrificial skin. The material is essentially a honeycomb of fiberglass cells injected with an epoxy-based compound, and as plasma forms around the capsule, the outermost layer pyrolyzes, breaks down chemically, and that process carries heat away from the structure beneath. The design has heritage. Apollo used ablative shields. AVC kite has been rebuilt from the ground up for Orion. And in 2022, when Artemis I splashed down in the Pacific after 25 days in space, it looked, from the outside, like a triumph, until the engineers got to work. On December 11, 1972, Gene Cernan and Harrison Schmitt lifted off from the lunar surface in Apollo 17's ascent stage. Ron Evans waited for them in lunar orbit. 3 days later, the Command Module America hit Earth's atmosphere, and those 3 men survived a re-entry that remains, to this day, the most extreme thermal environment any human crew has successfully passed through. The Apollo heat shields were handcrafted. Literally. Technicians injected AVC cod compound into each honeycomb cell by hand, 370,000 individual cells across the shield surface. It was slow, labor-intensive, and imprecise enough that engineers worried about voids, empty pockets in the material that could catastrophically underperform under plasma heating. They worried about the right thing, but the shields held. When NASA revived AVC kite for Orion, they modernized the process. Instead of filling individual cells, they cast the material in large blocks and bonded them to the heat shield structure. It was cleaner, more controlled, more reproducible. The thermal models said it would perform at least as well as Apollo. The thermal models were wrong. Post-flight analysis of Artemis I's shield found that char had been lost in ways the computational models had not captured. The ablation, the deliberate burning away process, had proceeded unevenly. In some regions, more material than expected had been consumed. In others, the char layer had cracked and separated in a phenomenon engineers described as char liberation. Chunks of the protective burned layer detaching from the shield face while still in the plasma environment. NASA's Jim Free, Associate Administrator for Exploration Systems, confirmed in 2023 that the anomaly was real and that it was being investigated. The language used in official briefings had the careful, measured cadence of people communicating uncertainty in a domain where uncertainty has consequences. Michael Collins, who orbited the moon alone during Apollo 11 while Armstrong and Aldrin were on the surface, once said about his own isolation, "I am alone now, truly alone, and absolutely isolated from any known life." He meant it philosophically, poetically. For the Artemis II crew, there will be a moment of comparable, literal isolation, and it will come just before the heat shield is tested. Here is the physics of the problem, stripped to its core. When Orion approaches Earth from lunar distance, it does not aim directly at the surface. It aims at a corridor, a narrow band of atmosphere between approximately 5 and 7 degrees of entry angle. Too shallow, and the spacecraft skips off the atmosphere like a stone off water and never comes home. Too steep, and the deceleration forces and thermal load exceed what the structure and the humans inside can survive. That corridor is roughly 2 degrees wide. At lunar return velocity, threading it is a navigation problem of extraordinary precision. But the corridor is not the thing that failed. The corridor held. The navigation was flawless on Artemis I. What failed, what behaved unexpectedly, was what happens inside the plasma. At lunar return speeds, the shock layer in front of Orion's heat shield becomes a fully ionized plasma. The temperatures exceed 2,760 degrees Celsius, hotter than the surface of the sun's outer layer, hotter than any rocket exhaust, hotter than almost anything humans have created deliberately. And in that environment, the AVC coat material begins its design sacrifice. Pyrolyzing, outgassing, charring. The gas that burns off creates a thin boundary layer that actually insulates the shield from the worst of the plasma, a phenomenon called blockage. The outgassing pushes back against the incoming heat. The designers knew this. They designed for it. What they did not fully model was what happens when the char layer forms unevenly, when some sections of the shield are burning faster than others, when cracks develop in the char structure under the aerodynamic and acoustic stress of a 25-day mission at cryogenic temperatures, and then a violent re-entry. The char is not just a byproduct of the process. It is part of the insulation system. When it liberates prematurely, the fresh ablative material beneath it is suddenly exposed without the thermal buffer the char was supposed to provide. For the Artemis II crew, this is not abstract. This is the material standing between their skin and superheated plasma, and the question hanging over the mission, quiet but persistent in every engineering meeting, every safety review, is whether the corrective measures NASA has implemented since Artemis I are sufficient, or whether the fix addresses a symptom while the underlying cause remains, as some engineers privately believe, incompletely understood. Reid Wiseman has described the Artemis II mission with a kind of deliberate calm that experienced astronauts use when discussing risk. It is not denial. It is a trained compartmentalization, the ability to hold the full weight of what could go wrong while continuing to function at peak performance. Wiseman served as a naval aviator before NASA. He understands systems that fail. Victor Glover, who spent 168 days aboard the International Space Station, has spoken about the difference between orbital risk and deep space risk. On the ISS, rescue is theoretically possible. A Soyuz is docked. Plans exist. For Artemis II, at maximum lunar distance, the concept of rescue is essentially a philosophical one. You are where you are, and you're coming home on the hardware you launched with. Or, you are not coming home at all. Christina Koch holds the record for the longest single spaceflight by a woman, 328 days. She has lived inside systems that required absolute trust to engineering decisions made years before she boarded. She knows, with the intimacy that only long-duration spaceflight provides, what it means to exist inside a machine and simply have to believe in it. Jeremy Hansen will be the first Canadian to leave Earth orbit. The first Canadian to see the moon not as a light in the sky but as a surface. He is trained for a mission profile that, if it succeeds, will place him further from Earth than any human has traveled in half a century. If it fails at the heat shield, at re-entry, he will become something else entirely. A name on a memorial, a reason for a years-long investigation, a turning point in a program that humanity's return to the moon depends upon. There is a specific moment during lunar flyby when all 4 of them will be on the far side of the moon simultaneously. No communication with Earth. The signal does not bend around the moon, it stops, completely blocked by 3,474 kilometers of solid rock. Mission control goes silent. Not quiet. Silent. No telemetry. No voice. No confirmation of any kind that the 4 people inside that capsule are alive. This blackout lasts approximately 25 minutes. 25 minutes in which 4 people breathing recycled air, moving through a capsule the size of a large SUV interior, with 8,900 kilometers of empty space between them and home, are the most isolated humans alive, more isolated than any explorer in history. Scott at the South Pole had Earth beneath his feet. These 4 have nothing in any direction but vacuum. And when they come around the lunar limb and the signal returns, when Houston hears them again, there is approximately 72 hours before the heat shield question gets its answer. The psychological preparation for this is genuine, documented, and still, by every account from astronaut training programs, deeply inadequate for the actual experience. Frank Borman, commander of Apollo 8, the first mission to carry humans around the moon, describes the Farside passage as producing a profound loneliness, a kind of spiritual disorientation. Bill Anders, who took the famous Earthrise photograph on that mission, said afterward that the moon itself was not what moved him. What moved him was looking back. The Artemis II crew will look back too. They will see Earth as a disk, not a horizon, not a landscape, but a sphere, all of it, all of us, fitting within the span of a thumb held at arm's length. And then they will point the spacecraft toward that disk and begin the process of coming home. Here is what we know precisely about what NASA changed. After Artemis's post-flight analysis, engineers identified several contributing factors to the char loss anomaly. The bonding process between AVC coat blocks and the underlying structure was examined for voids. The thermal gradient models were revised using the actual flight data, the real plasma environment the capsule encountered, not the computational prediction. And the reentry trajectory was analyzed for whether specific atmospheric conditions during Artemis's particular entry window had created localized heating variations not captured in pre-flight modeling. What they found was that the answer involved all of these factors in combination, not a single root cause. A convergence of conditions. That phrase, convergence of conditions, is one of the most dangerous phrases in accident investigation. It means no single failure that can be cleanly fixed. It means a systemic interaction between variables, some of which may be understood, and some of which may not. The Columbia Investigation Board used similar language. So did the Challenger investigation. NASA's response has been methodical, and by all public indications, genuinely rigorous. They have updated bonding procedures. They have refined thermal models with actual flight data. They have adjusted trajectory parameters. They have run additional material testing. By every formal safety review metric, Artemis II has cleared its gates. But the engineers who know this system most intimately hold a specific kind of knowledge that does not appear in press releases. The knowledge of what we do not know. The knowledge of the gap between our models now match the Artemis I data, and we fully understand the physics of what will happen to the shield at lunar return velocity with the crew aboard. These are not the same thing, and the 4 people climbing into Orion for Artemis II know this. They have sat in the engineering reviews. They have heard the analysis. They have asked the questions. And they have made the decision that the answer is good enough, not perfect, not certain, but good enough to proceed. There is a concept in test flight culture called acceptable risk. Not safe, but acceptable. Chuck Yeager, breaking the sound barrier in a Bell X-1 with broken ribs he would hidden from the flight surgeon because he did not want to be grounded, understood acceptable risk. Alan Shepard, lying on his back in Freedom 7 while the launch was delayed for hours, quietly saying, "Why do not you fix your little problem and light this candle?" Understood it. The Artemis II crew understands it. When Orion hits Earth's atmosphere on the return from lunar flyby, traveling at 11 kilometers per second, the plasma will form. The shield will begin to ablate. The char will form, and this is the part will either hold in the patterns the updated models predict, or it will do something else. Something unexpected. Something that, in the worst case, the crew will have a very limited time to register before the outcome is no longer in question. The blackout at re-entry, when the ionized plasma around the capsule disrupts radio signals, lasts approximately 4 minutes. 4 minutes in which Houston holds its breath. 4 minutes in which the tracking cameras watch the sky for a streak of light. 4 minutes that are, in their quiet way, the most important minutes in the future of human space exploration. And then, parachutes. And a capsule on the surface of the Pacific Ocean. And either the beginning of Artemis III, humanity's return to the lunar surface, or the beginning of something else entirely. What Artemis II is, beneath all the engineering briefings and trajectory analyses and heat shield material science, is a wager. It is humanity betting with 4 people as the stakes that we understand a physical environment well enough to send humans through it. Not completely understand. Not perfectly understand. Understand enough. Every great step in exploration has been this wager. Magellan's crew did not know the Pacific was that large. The Apollo 1 crew did not know the capsule atmosphere was that flammable. The Challenger crew did not know the O-rings were that cold. We learn by going. We pay, sometimes, with the worst currency. What is different about Artemis II is that we do know the shield showed unexpected behavior. We know it. We have documented it. We have analyzed it. And we are going anyway. Not recklessly, not ignorantly, but with the particular human combination of incomplete knowledge, careful engineering, and will. That combination built every bridge, launched every rocket, and carried every person who ever looked back at Earth from the far side of the moon. But here is what Artemis II is actually designed to test beyond the heat shield. What the mission profile will reveal about the deep space environment that no amount of engineering testing on Earth can replicate. The radiation environment beyond Earth's magnetosphere. Van Allen belts, crossed twice. And what 4 specific people's bodies will show us about what lunar distance spaceflight does to human physiology, in ways that will determine whether Artemis III is even biologically viable. That is not a small question. That is the question that decides whether anyone walks on the moon again. And that is next.